Is there a good time to use should, or is it always bad? Now, should is a word around which there's a lot of conflicting dogma, and dogma which can create a lot of mixed messages and confusion. So generally in the personal development world, should is considered bad, and you're generally encouraged to stop shoulding all over yourself. Whereas society generally champions the should, in the name of correctness, obligation, and kind of proof that you are worthy of being part of the clan. Now, in my opinion, which I'll be sharing with you today, these mixed messages are very polarising. And the trouble with polarising, as we see so much in the world today, is that the nuanced discussion is lost and we miss the positive aspects of the different perspectives, and we lose the gift that each perspective can bring. Well, in this episode, we're going to take a nuanced look at self-directed should. So I'll offer you my perspective on the dark side of should, and if you're suffering from it, how to set yourself free, and the often missed situation where a self-directed should is a good thing. Now, my aim today is to help you find a place that's more authentic, with more self-love and kindness, free from that inner harshness and misplaced judgment, so you can feel more connected to who you really are. So let's get into it. Hit it, Kim.
Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. You're in the right place if you're a growth-seeking being who acknowledges the challenges and delights of your humanity on the path to an ever more conscious life. If you want to feel inspired to love and accept yourself, to feel free to be and express you in all your brilliance, if you want to truly value yourself and others and feel energized and alive both at home and in the world, then sit back and take a breath as you explore and grow the brilliance of your beautiful human self with your host, the father of non-personal awareness and creator of the MPA process, Joel Young.
Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. I am delighted that you're here. We're at episode number 97, which means you can find the show notes if you go to www.beabrillianthuman.com/97, and it means there's 96 previous episodes to dive into, binge watch, and do more good than if you were watching Netflix, unless you really need to chill and just mong off, But it's good stuff. Go listen to them if you haven't already. And we're in, the middle of August, really. I want to give you a heads up. I am taking a holiday. I have been such a busy boy these last 6 weeks or so. I've launched the August Abundance Assembly, which I told you about last week. We've got a new program called Bulletproof, Never Be Manipulated Again, coming up, which I'll tell you more about in the future. I've been running the MPA Mastery Program, teaching change workers, healers, therapists, practitioners to be awesome facilitators in an agenda-free, resistance-free way. And by the way, if you're interested in that, you can go to www.thempaacademy.com/MPA Mastery. And if you get there before the end of August, there's a half price offer as I open registration for the 2022 intake. And as a result of that, I need a holiday. I am going on holiday next week, and we're going to take a break from the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. So it'll be 2 weeks before the next episode, which gives us a bit more time before we get to the 100th episode, which I've been talking about the last few episodes. And I'd love your input on that. If there's a particular episode that has touched you, or you loved, or you just found particularly interesting, let me know. I'd love to hear, in general, how this podcast has, why you're enjoying it, why you're listening to it. Why are you listening to it again? There must be something good. Tell me. And if there's a particular favourite, let me know. You can do that by all the usual methods. You can get in touch via social media, generally at Joel Young MPA. That's on things like Twitter and Instagram. On Facebook, if you go to facebook.com/NPA Rocks, November Papa Alpha Rocks, you can comment on the posts that are out there about the episodes, or you can PM me, DM me, do that private thing, or email me, joel@nonpersonalawareness.com. Again, links for all that will be in the show notes as well. Let me know, because the 100th episode, which I'm very much looking forward to, is going to be a celebration of the top 10 episodes according to listens, and also I'd love to include some feedback and suggestions and honourable mentions from you guys. So reach out and let me know. In fact, you should definitely do it. Because we're looking at should today, the wonderful world of shoulding. Particularly, we're going to be looking at self-directed shoulding. I had a couple of good examples of that in our MPA community call last night, and it inspired me to talk a little about, the ins and outs, the goods, the bads of shoulding. Specifically, talking about those situations where shoulding becomes painful and how you can handle that. But also, there is a particular time when it can be really useful, actually. So I'll be telling you all about that. All right, let's get into it. So this is one of those situations where it's like, would you like the good news or the bad news first? So I thought I'd give you the bad news. We'll talk about the dark side of should first. So, as I said, there's within the personal development world, and this is fundamentally a personal development and self-growth podcast, there's generally a lot of dogma that says that should is always bad. Now, there's good reasons why that is, although it's a very generalized statement and it does miss the nuances, as I said in the introduction, there's good reason for it. Most of the ways that we use the word should are not entirely helpful. I will save the good stuff for the end, but I think we need to talk about the should. It comes, especially in self-directed terms, as the kind of what should I do, what should I be, or who should I be, what should I have, what shouldn't I have, what shouldn't I do, because shouldn't, of course, is the other side of should. But mostly the issue is that the comparison or the yardstick for it is, according to the world. And by the world, it can be the world in general. It could be the local world, as in, your particular crew or culture or, the context of where that should comes. But for the most part, it's like trying to compare where you are compared to where someone else or somebody else's idea thinks you're supposed to be or should be doing, or it's that comparison thing. And the thing about it is it's not usually coming from a place of asking, is this right or wrong for me? In fact, the whole idea of right and wrong is like at the core, in a sense, of the problem. And the should definition, I actually looked it up on the dictionary, as I like to do with words. Should is used to indicate obligation, duty, and correctness. Now, I'm not a fan of any of those words unless there are clearly defined parameters, as is what I'm doing today with the should. Correctness is something which is, where do I start with correctness? What is correct? What the hell is correct anyway? Who says it's correct? Well, the only person really who can define that is you. And that doesn't mean that it won't meet, society's norms. That's the thing where people miss it is, if something is correct for you, it could align very much with a lot of what other people say. But that's very different from where you're misaligned with yourself based on trying to meet some external or social standard or ideal. And the thing about when you start using self-directed shoulds and they're not really in alignment with you is that's where it gets into real trouble. What I'm sure you found, because I know a human that hasn't experienced this, is that it can become very harsh. When you start using these shoulds as a self-judgment, it becomes very, very harsh internally. And I want to talk to you about the mechanism of how it works and why we get stuck in it and why it ends up creating such a problem. In the harshness of it and the implication of it, that the should implies that you should be somewhere that you're not, it creates a pressure. I should this, I should that. It creates a pressure, and that pressure, any pressure inside us as human beings causes friction, and friction causes stuckness. And the pressure, because it's like, I know we're humans, but we're like donkeys. You know what I mean? It's like you try and force a donkey, it puts its hooves in. It's almost like we have this internal mechanism that means that when the forces try to push or pull against what is natural, we seize up in some way, which often shows up as that resistance. So a self-judgment, a should, that is telling you need to be something that is not aligned with where you're at, creates stuckness, pressure, and a lot of problems. And when your body starts to freeze up, or your mind starts to freeze up with that, it reduces the space. It reduces your capacity to actually genuinely self-reflect. You're focusing out there on what other people say is A, B, or C, the right way, the wrong way, the this, the that, the how you should be, how you should look, how you should feel, how you should respond. And it locks the system up, so you're not able to get, again, that nuanced sense of what's really true for you. And that mismatch thing, again, there are sort of deep currents that get affected when you're trying to align with something that isn't really true to you. Then you have a mismatch, which creates this sort of low-level confusion. Well, it can be a very high-level confusion, but oftentimes it's that low-level confusion, like the fridge humming constantly in your ear. Because basically you're creating a disconnection. You're creating a disconnection from yourself. You're literally losing yourself into the should, which is why, generally, it's a dogma, but there's good reasons for it that kind of should is not going to be helpful to you. That's going to be kind of poisonous. And again, the mismatch comes from the comparison. Remember that the main point here with should is generally you're taking somebody else's idea or their ideal or their formula. There are plenty of things that will give you a formula for A, B, or C. And, it's probably come from a really good place of what works for them. That's why I use words like generally I found, or this is my perspective. It's just a perspective. It's good for you to check in with you. But if you take someone else's formula and then apply it to you and it doesn't quite fit, it gets confusing because, you can see all the evidence of how it worked for other people. And it doesn't work for you. Doesn't make the formula wrong. It can be right for loads of people, but it's really that inner discernment, of what works for you, really. So I had two really good examples of this in last night's community call, as I said to you before. The first one was a lady who was asking, should I be crying? It was really a case of, I'm noticing she was experiencing grief, but there weren't tears. And she was getting confused because it was like, I feel like people say I should be crying, but I'm not crying. And I'm not sure if it's because I need to cry and I can't, or whether it's just that I'm, to paraphrase, wrong in some way. There's something wrong with me because I'm not crying. This is absolutely classic. And what was happening, I could see in her, was that sense of pressure and confusion was building up. It was not helping the situation. And clearly there was, there were those comparisons and second guessing of the self that was going on based on some idea. And the underlying thought was, maybe I should be crying. So again, shoulding on herself in that way. And, we see this a lot with, I should feel, if such and such happens, I should feel this, you should be angry in this situation. Well, maybe I'm not angry. What if that's okay? Maybe it doesn't do the same thing to me as it does to you, whoever you are. We sort of have these societal sort of dictates of how you're supposed to feel. Fuck 'em. You get to decide how you feel, or you get to explore how you feel, and the pace of your feelings and how they change could be completely different to what the expected norm is. They might fit the pattern, the stages of grief or whatever, they might fit that pattern. For a lot of people it does, because, and that's why it's created into a formula, but then that doesn't mean everybody's going to fit the formula. We're not all the same. And even if we're basically the same, there's always going to be nuances and differences for everybody. So that was one example. And the other example was someone else who is in a very difficult situation where, one of her parents is has been diagnosed as terminal and, only child. And again, I could see the pressure because there are decisions that need to be made and things that she's never encountered before. And this self-beration around, I should know what to do. I should know what to do. Well, again, this is one of those situations where who says that? Who says you should know what to do? If you've never met a situation before, how would you know? And even if you go Googling it, there's a difference between, someone else's experience and your own. So again, it's like this harshness, this sense of mismatching who you are, this confusion, this self-judgment that comes through it is very, very unhelpful. So what did I recommend to them, and what am I recommending to you if you get yourself caught up in this harsh, unhelpful shoulding? So what should you do if you're jammed up with a should? Seriously though, all of my suggestions on this show, everything I offer you is just my perspective. I do hope you get that. I take pains or make pains to sort of try and offer that language, because I don't have the exact ultimate answer for you, but I do have my experience and I do have my suggestions, and I certainly hope that some of it, if not all of it, does actually connect with you and helps you along the way. It's based on my experience with myself and with many, many clients and customers on all sorts of events and programs. So when you're jammed up with a should, if I was to give you an overarching sense of what can be really helpful, it's to soften and soothe yourself. Because as I said before, the mechanism gets jammed up because the pressure goes on, the friction kicks in, and it's a bit like a bunch of cogs. If you take out all the oil and then adjust the positions of them so that there's no space for genuine movement, the system just jams up. Your engine blows up. What it needs is there to be soothing and softening. That's the oil bit. And there needs to be space so that they can move, stay connected, but move together as well. So how do we do that? Let me give you some ideas. Well, the first thing is to recognize that whatever that should is, it's just an idea. That's all it is. And the chances are that idea, or again, it might be an idea, it might be an ideal, it might be a formula, might be a trend maybe, those kind of things. But it's just an idea, and it's probably not come from you. And even if it has come from you, seemingly, if it's not fitting, chances are it's come from some other part of you that's been influenced by somebody else's idea. If it feels like it's harsh and there's pressure, that's your clue. It says it's not aligned for you, or you're not there yet. So that's the first step. Recognize it's just an idea. And then the key is you've got to accept where you are. I repeat this throughout this program because I think this is one of the most healing things you can do in your entire life, is to just get humble, people, and accept where you are. Whatever. Again, goes to the core of comparison. I should be more spiritual. I should be more enlightened. Or I think I'm more enlightened than I am. And then you get nowhere because you're operating from a place that you're just not at. So especially when it comes to shoulds, really accepting where you are, what's the situation that you're in, and where are you? And so if I use the example, with the lady who was saying, well, maybe I can't cry. It's like, well, you do need to accept that crying's not here. That's whether you should or shouldn't be crying in this situation. And I know it's painful. Just accept yourself where you are. That's not what's happening. So can I just be with that? And being with it, I think, is the trick there, really, just to be with where you are. And if you can bring that softness and soothing to being with where you are, things can change very quickly. Now, one of my favorite ways to do that is self-dialogue, to sort of really come, literally what I said to this lady was, just sit with yourself. That part of you that's, whether it's not able to, because she was confused. Is it because I'm not able to cry? Is it that I'm this, that, and the other? It's just sit with them and go, I'm here. I see that there's this idea you want to cry, and but that's not the case. You're not crying right now, so it's okay. It's okay just to be here with it. And when you do that sort of self-dialoguing thing, it seems like you're splitting yourself, but you're actually being with yourself, and you can create that internal togetherness. And when you can bring the energy of compassion and allowing to yourself when you're jammed up from a should, there is a softening that takes place. And she was able to understand that and get that and sort of get that sense of softness. And from that, it's like the confusion of is it this or is it that was resolved. The system was able to move. And at that time, what actually happened was she was able to cry in that way. Now, it's not about having an agenda about, well, if I'm soft, then you'll do what you should. That ain't going to work. You won't be fooled. You'll think you're fooling yourself, but your system won't be fooled. It took the genuine softness, the genuine soothing, and the genuine compassion. Similarly, with the lady who's got a parent who's terminal, it was like, just to be soft. Can you be with yourself and be, it's okay if I get this wrong. It's okay if I make a mistake. Is it okay that I don't know? Can it be okay? Yes, it can be okay that I don't know. And I can acknowledge that it's just an idea that, I should know, that's come from who knows where, and I don't really care, but clearly it's not true. So I can just be okay with myself where I'm at. And in that, the judgment was dropped and a softening occurred. The should went away, and then a path of open exploration about what the best steps to do in that situation could be taken much more clearly. So that self-dialoguing and soothing, it takes the pressure off, it unjams the system, and it gives you space, to find what's really true for you. So when is should good? We've talked a lot about the bad stuff, but there is a situation where the use of the word should can actually be a very powerful thing. And I don't really think I've heard anybody talk about this, but then I haven't listened to everybody all over the world and everything they've said, so I might not be the first. But when is it good? The situation where I found that the should word can be really helpful is when it comes in the context of honest self-confession. Honest self-confession, that means where you are sort of having an admission to yourself of the denials that have been. So this is an interesting one because it's the difference between the should that comes from something which is misaligned to a should which is discovering the alignment that's there. So there may be two different situations where you're saying the same thing, and one is a should which is unhelpful, which is poison, and one which is genuinely helpful, which is actually kind of self-prescribed medicine, which is healing. So let's say that you have a should which is, I should eat more greens, for example. Now, if you've got the I should eat more greens in the unhelpful, because, such and such on telly says I should, because all the, the spiritual people around me said that's better for you and but actually that's not really where you're at. That's not going to be helpful. Whereas if, let's say that you come to that conclusion, you realize that you're not doing it, but when you speak it out that you should do that, it's that sense of, that's my truth. So I should do it because it would align me with my truth, is a whole different energy. It's a whole different situation. Now, I would recommend whichever way you use should, you come with the softness and the openness, because even if it's a self-confession, it's still possible to sort of err into the harshness of it. Whereas the softness, bringing it into more of a state of realization and admission, is going to help you stay open and give you more chance of taking actions that are aligned with you. So think of it as underlying softness, underlying realization, and underlying alignment with yourself. So there is some discernment required, but I think it's an underutilized way of using a should. So if I was to sort of really lay down the difference between what I would consider to be an unhelpful or unhealthy should versus one which is genuinely, positive. In other words, one's the poison, one's the medicine. So your clues are, if there's a should going on and it creates pressure and friction, then that means that you're not aligned with it, and it's time to soothe and soften, give yourself space to reconnect with who you are. If there's a should that brings relief and realization, that means you're aligned and it's more likely to be productive. Now, one thing I'd say to bring extra nuance to this is that sometimes we have shoulds which are self-confessions or admissions to ourselves, and we know it's what's right for us. The tricky bit there is to watch out for where then the unhealthy should comes in terms of how soon you're supposed to be there. You should do it now. And that's when you need to come back and discover, what is your actual pace, that humility of being connected to where you're actually at. So it may be that you understand there's a realization you should eat more greens, but right now there are challenges to that. So you come into alignment with what the little steps, the incremental steps could be to take you forward in that general direction, rather than going, well, you should eat greens and you've just had a pizza. Bad Joel, you ate a pizza when you should be eating greens. You've just turned that medicine into poison. So be aware of that. But as long as you can stay aligned, then the should can in fact be helpful. So before we wrap this up, there's one more thing that I want to address, because we're talking about internal directed shoulds. What about those externally directed shoulds? They should. Well, generally I'd say to you, because I might do a full episode on that at some point, but generally externalized shoulds are pure projection. You're projecting whatever your ideals or your sense of what the ideal should be onto other people. And my suggestion is that you own it. As I've been talking about a bit in this episode, when I share my suggestions, I offer it as my perspective. You could, it's an option. I found it useful. Find out for yourself is different from you should. And mostly when we should on other people, we're trying to prove or disprove that we secretly believe that about ourselves anyway. Hence, we do the projection. We project it out onto other people rather than owning it. So if you find yourself in the realm of external shoulds, own that, baby. Either own it as your perspective or own that it's something that's actually more likely to be either your medicine or your poison, which you are avoiding taking yourself. And again, if it's your poison, then now you have a potential way to look at it and go, is that really something I want to live with in my energy? All right, and speaking of energy, if you're working with the energy of shoulds in general, then NPA itself is a fabulous tool. I haven't mentioned it so far today. NPA, if you're curious about it, go to joelyoungnpa.com. If you're any kind of change worker or healer, therapist, that kind of thing, coach, and you want to look at more of the professional side, go to www.thenpaacademy.com. Definitely check out the mastery program, which, as I say, in August right now, I've just reopened the intake for the 2022 group. And right now, if you get in really early, which is now before the end of August, there's an offer on half price off, which will save you a lot of money. And also check out the testimonial. I have to tell you about this. There's a testimonial that the people who are currently on it did. They got together on Zoom and shared their experience, and it was really wonderful. They did that, and what they shared, I think, will give you a real insight into what it's about if that's something that you're interested in. I think that's it. Oh yes, I was talking about NPA. Download the free sheet. Go to joelyoungnpa.com or go to npa4, that's a number 4.me/NPA sheet, I think. I hope that's right. I'm not going to check it. I'm about ready for my holiday. I'm going on there soon. Which means, again, to remind you there won't be one next week. I'm wittering on. That's the end of this one. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what you've heard, make sure you tell somebody. And I will see you in a couple of weeks. Big hugs. All that remains is to cue the moo.